first, before we start, I'd like to tell you that I will be releasing at the same time as this one another video where I'll be talking to the camera for 10 minutes straight in Portuguese without using any English and without any scripts. I'll just be improvising. So this is made for you to see what's realistic and to see how I sound like, my accent, my level, all of that. So I'll let you go check out this video after this one. I'll be pinning it at the end of the video on the end screen. Okay, without further ado, let's get started. First, why did I choose to learn Portuguese and why European Portuguese? I couldn't say precisely why I started learning Portuguese, why I wanted to learn Portuguese. I think that I had heard some songs in Portuguese before that I really liked. I liked how the way they made me feel, and I was just a bit curious about this culture in general. And why European Portuguese as opposed to Brazilian Portuguese that is more popular, it has more speakers? Well, I'd say it's because Portugal is closer to my hometown and I wanted to travel for a month at the destination where the language I would be learning was spoken. Portugal, I love this country. I had been there before. It was close to my hometown, and I have to say that I also like doing things few people do, and also learning European Portuguese doesn't prevent me from speaking with Brazilians. So all in all, I decided to learn European Portuguese in Portugal. So I spent 1 month in Porto and later on 1 week in Madeira, but I will be talking about this later in this video. I started learning European Portuguese in the beginning of April, I'd say, but at first I wasn't very focused on it. I had told myself, Luca, now your main focus is going to be Portuguese. That's the language you're learning now. But I guess my mind was still a bit distracted by the other languages I was learning before. I'm talking about Spanish and Ukrainian, and it was hard for me to switch my focus and really pour myself into it, I'd say. And I didn't panic at the time. I knew it would be temporary, and I also knew that it would take time for me to, and I say this a lot, it would take time for me to get obsessed and to actually cultivate an inner and authentic, genuine curiosity when it comes to the language I'm learning. With European Portuguese, it took a few weeks where I was just browsing on the internet, searching answers for my questions. How do you say this? How do you say that? I wasn't very active. I was just maybe watching some videos, listening to some stuff. I tried watching a Netflix series, but I couldn't. It was too hard for me. And for the first few weeks, that was like this. I know, pretty disappointing. But then after that, I wanted to drive my interest up a little bit, artificially, I'd say, and I did this by actually talking to people in real life. So what I did was to go at a language exchange event in Montreal. It takes place in a bar weekly, and I found some Brazilians to talk with. No Portuguese people, I couldn't find any. Sometimes there are, you don't know who you're gonna see there. So I went there with the little Portuguese I know, and I tried to have some conversations, tried to introduce myself, ask some questions. But of course, I couldn't do much. I didn't know a lot of verbs, a lot of words. I was kind of trying to use my Spanish and convert it to Portuguese with just using a different accent, which worked sometimes. I forgot to mention also that I was practicing how to pronounce things correctly. I was just talking alone in my room and listening to stuff and trying to, it's called shadowing, I think. I was trying to replicate the accent, the intonations and everything, which helped a little bit at first. But yeah, those first interactions were very hard, very challenging, and it sure made me uncomfortable, even though the people I was talking with were very nice, very patient and well regarding. But that was enough for me for my subconscious to get that Portuguese was going to be my focus now, and that's when I started to be a bit more curious, to look up more things, to just seek more Portuguese in my everyday life. And then a day before leaving to Porto in Portugal, I ordered an instant lesson on italki, and this was with a Brazilian tutor because it was kind of a spur of the moment thing, and we spoke for 30 minutes in Portuguese. Now, of course, it was a real struggle for me. I'd say that the first few minutes were okay. It was very slow paced and everything, but I could say things kind of. But then after that, I was really not endurant, which made sense at the time because I had so little practice, and it took the life of me to finish my sentences, find some words. Even when my tutor would help me, it was very hard. But I enjoyed this experience, and I think it gave me a little bit of a confidence to get there, to go to Portugal and get around for the first few days. I was afraid that if I went without knowing anything, because after all my goal was to learn Portuguese in Portugal, but I was afraid that if I didn't know anything when arriving there, I would be kind of lost and discouraged. And also I didn't want to use English there because I felt like that was a trap. If I started learning English, I thought that it would impact the rest of my learning because I would have in my mind this alternative to Portuguese. But basically, when I arrived there, I tried my best every time I could speak Portuguese to get around without any English. Now, of course, at first, I was constrained to switch back to English when, for example, I was checking in at my hostel. It was too much information, too many words that I didn't know. So I tried at first in Portuguese, and then I let go. I gave up, I'd say, and spoke English. But every time it was kind of like this, at the cashier, at the checkout, in grocery stores. Whenever I was in restaurants or anywhere, I would try to speak Portuguese as much as possible. And I was challenged with that more than I thought I would be, because people would, anytime they would see I had an accent, I didn't know a word, I would commit a mistake, they would switch to English to help me. And that was very frustrating because I was really trying to speak Portuguese. I had some conversations where I was speaking Portuguese, but the person was talking back in English, which was very confusing for me. But I do think that came from a good place, because I think they saw me struggling, they were seeing me struggling, and they wanted to help me. I also think that they saw me as an opportunity to practice their English, which I'm not mad against, but I just fought a little bit to speak as much Portuguese as possible. So the first 2 weeks were kind of like that. I was exploring around, walking. I didn't meet many people. It was calm, I'd say. I had some interactions, but they were mainly predictable, in the sense where it was just checking out at the cashier in grocery stores, talking to any staff when you have some daily life interactions with the workers. That was what was happening. Some of them were still challenging and complicated, so I did make some progress, and I think that it was not a bad thing that the first 2 weeks were kind of easy and calm-ish, because it allowed me to build some confidence. And at the end of those 2 weeks, that's when I recorded myself speaking Portuguese for the first time. I wish that I had done that earlier, but I learned my lesson at some point. And it looked something like this. Olá, me chamo Luca e estou aprendendo português. Não faz longe tempo que estou aprendendo português. Estou aprendendo português com o sotaque de Portugal. E agora estou no Porto, ao lado no Porto, em uma cidade que se chama Matosinhos. Não posso falar bem, ainda não. mas eu trato cada dia de falar em português, porque estou no Portugal e eu posso. Ah, eu acho que o meu sotaque não, ainda não é bom. After those 2 weeks, I'd say, a bit bored because I had explored some places, walked around, and I wanted to try something new, or new things in general. I wanted to do some new activities, to have some experiences, but most importantly, to be more in contact with the culture and to have deeper and longer conversations. So I started to talk to people in public, to strangers, which was very uncomfortable. I also took some Brazilian jiu-jitsu lessons, which were very challenging, but it was a great experience. More on that later. I went to language exchange events in bars, and I also did some sailing, surfing, all of that. That allowed me to get challenged in a new way, because I would know some superficial stuff, but when it came to certain interactions, certain topics of conversation, I didn't really know. So talking to natives on a longer amount of time was very helpful, and I keep some very good memories from that. I think those last 2 weeks in Porto were the one I had the most fun speaking Portuguese. I had the most, I don't know, dopamine flooding through my system when I was finally having a conversation, and when it was flowing, I was understanding most of what I was hearing, and that was a very good feeling. But on the other hand, I was also having some very tough situations, like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that I mentioned earlier. It was so hard. Basically, the lessons consisted of a warm-up. So we would all warm up together, not too hard. Then a cardio workout, not too hard either. Well, challenging physically, but not mentally. And then after, we would fight in pairs. And the person I was fighting with was giving me instructions on how to do certain movements and how to fight, really. And it was involving body parts and how to place my weight, where to place my weight, when to pull, when to push. Really, really challenging, and I wasn't seeing the person I was talking to, or from way too close, and I couldn't get the signs I usually rely on, which is hand gesture, facial expression, and all that. So it was a very good experience, a very good discovery, but that's when I got the most challenged Portuguese wise. The second most challenging things I've done in using Portuguese, or talking to strangers in the street, in the metro, or at the park. I would try to approach them even though I didn't feel like it, I didn't want to, but I forced myself to go and have conversations. Of course, I would be very respectful and very clear about my intentions. I would say that I was learning Portuguese in order to practice, and I think most of the time I would start off the conversation by asking something about the culture. It could be about what music they listen to, or where they go to make friends around the region, or what places they like to eat at. It was very superficial, very easy to answer. I didn't want to make them uncomfortable, and every time they were very happy to chat with me, very nice. I had some very good encounters, and I didn't regret talking to strangers at all. It was a very good experience. After this month in Portugal, I felt pretty confident about my Portuguese. I very much enjoyed speaking Portuguese, and I was kind of sad to leave, but it was to go back to see my family in France, so I was pretty happy. And during the 3 weeks I spent in France, I did not speak Portuguese at all, or just a couple of times on the phone for a very short amount of time. So almost nothing. And one would think that I would lose some of the things that I had learned, or that after that it would take me time to get back to it, to adapt back. But pretty interestingly, I didn't find this to be the case. There was an impact on my level, but not the one I was expecting. I knew I would not lose anything because I had created an emotional link with Portuguese. I knew that the stuff that I had internalized wouldn't go away, wouldn't vanish like this. But I was far from thinking that I would actually improve my level when I started speaking again. What I found was that when I went to Madeira with my family, after the 3 weeks of, let's say, a break from Portuguese, I felt more confident speaking Portuguese. I felt that I had a better flow when speaking and a better accent. It was easier for me to speak Portuguese than before, which was very surprising. During my week-long stay in Madeira, I had to obviously adapt to their accent, as it is different from Porto. I mean, people articulate less in Madeira, but nonetheless, I could speak. I could have some conversations with the people there, even though it was with my family. It was a very pleasant stay, and I really liked the culture there as well. But the thing with the break helping me improve, I think I already noticed this when I was back in Portugal, when I was still in Portugal, and when I felt kind of overwhelmed with Portuguese, kind of exhausted from it, I would take like a day-long break from Portuguese. So I would stay quiet and walk on my own, not meet people, not interact too much with Portuguese. And after those breaks, I would find that I would be more confident, I would speak more easily, and I would have a better level overall. Didn't pay much attention to it at the time, but now looking back, I feel like the kind of the same phenomena. If I have to explain what happens when this happens, I would say that it's because your brain gets a break from all of this, takes the necessary time to organize the thoughts and internalize and recover from the trauma that learning a new language is. And looking forward, I think that I will implement in my learning more of those breaks. Even though they happen naturally, I would pay more attention to them. Learning Portuguese has been an amazing experience. I loved being in Portugal. I love the people there. The culture is very rich history. The cities are very beautiful. But putting apart the human side of the experience, there are 3 things I'm taking away from a language learning perspective. Number 1 is that it's okay not to start right off being very aggressive with language learning, making progress very fast in the beginning, or at all, really. When I didn't feel like studying Portuguese, when I didn't feel like going at it, I let myself the choice to just relax and do it later. And I think I was able to build organic and genuine interests in Portuguese, which later on led me to really be obsessed with it. And that was a very good decision when I look back at it. So that was kind of confirming what I thought about language learning before, and I'm happy I took the time to do things slowly. The second thing I'm taking away from all of this is that taking breaks is actually necessary to progress, or at least helps a lot. I did know that taking breaks wasn't much of a big deal, that it wouldn't impact in a negative way, but I didn't think that, I never observed or never realized that taking breaks would actually make me progress and help me getting back at it in a better and more efficient way. So that's a very nice find, and I feel like it's the easiest and most efficient trick that you can pull off with language learning, assuming that you've been learning the language quite consistently before that. It doesn't work on its own. The third thing I'm taking away from all of this is that the first videos I was watching about Portuguese that were showing me some vocabulary lists, some grammar aspects, all of this, I don't really remember. I don't think I use any of those words I learned from videos earlier on. Now, I'm not saying they were irrelevant and useless, but I think they don't matter much. I think they were useful in the sense that they helped me stay in contact with the language and drive my curiosity and interest up, but they were not crucial. And I did observe that I started learning and I'd say internalizing stuff when it started being IRL, in real life, with people, when I had some, I call them medium to high stake conversations where the outcome was dependent on whether or not I was understanding or not. So it was boosting my learning and making it more important to my brain and the subconscious side of my brain. Thank you very much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed watching the video. I hope that it also inspired you learning new languages or continuing learning languages if you've already been doing that. I enjoyed scripting and presenting this video to you. Don't forget that you can watch a 10-minute video where I speak European Portuguese for 10 minutes straight to see how my level is. You don't have to take my word. Maybe I don't sound good, maybe I don't speak well. Go watch it, it's gonna be right after that on the end screen. Thank you for watching. C'était Luca Leandri. À bientôt.